I want to call this meeting to order. We are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, which I know is typically your thing.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I need a roll call, please, of the people who were there.
Cynthia Batty,
Tamara Stoner.
Kristen Zumar,
Bree Rivera.
Margot Rain,
Tim Gibbs. Chris Rogers, Aiken Come.
we have a quorum, and therefore we are empowered to do business. We have, first on the agenda, an approval of the minutes from July. Do I have any corrections, questions, comments on those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Moved.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
abstain.
You weren't here.
I wasn't here. Sure.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is public comment on the agenda items. So if anyone from the public would like to comment about the items on our agenda, you are welcome to do so. Can one of you keep time? You are limited to 3 minutes. And if you please come to the podium, give your name and address, and then your 3 minutes. Do I have anybody here to make comment? Seriously? All right. Going. Okay. Almost got away with it.
Hello, friends and neighbors. My name is Brian Madaway. Just wanted to thank the commission and the facilitator for you all's work to make our city better. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Brian.
Brian, and your address?
628 Delaware Street.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to close the public.
Can we just state, that there's not gonna be comments during the presentation?
Oh, that's true.
In regards, and this is the public's.
Only opportunity to comment on any of the things being presented tonight. So if you, go
The
ahead.
concept plan and everything.
So if anybody has any comments they want to make about what we're mainly going to be looking at and discussing, now's your only opportunity.
So we're not allowed to comment, so after you do your thing?
You can only comment now. You can't comment after we're done.
Like what you showed, we can't comment on,
Apparently not.
well, that's not fair.
Those are the rules,
We made those rules,
not me.
it don't sound too fair.
Okay.
Bill Gross, 1301 13th Street. I think this board, if not tonight, at some later point, should review that so that the public, one, can comment on what they've seen, because to literally comment on the agenda tonight, what are we commenting about? We don't know what the presentation is gonna be. So I suggest that. My only real comments are, again, I wanna thank Sean Tucker for doing the presentation. So at least when you review what you're going to review and the public goes away from the meeting, we have some idea in visual of what we're expecting or not expecting to be. And my only other comment is, again, it's been proven in the past. I do not believe that any elected officials should be attending any of the commission meetings or board meetings for the simple reason, could be undue, unnecessary, issues when it comes to autonomy of the board on unnecessary, it's conflict. And there's no reason for an elected individual to be attending these meetings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. So the first item for discussion on the agenda is the recommendation on ordinance 540. That was the ordinance we read at the public meeting before we started the planning meeting. Do you want to just do a very quick review?
Again, this is a proposed ordinance that has been to city council for first reading. It wouldn't be here if it hadn't. Your role is to make a recommendation to the city council, as you do on all amendments to the zoning ordinance. As there's two versions of ordinance 540. The first version that does not have any track changes allows the city council to require a petition, a zoning map petition, to be accompanied by a concept plan. It does not require it. It states the purpose of the concept plan is for the council and the planning commission to assess the amendment proposal and to identify any service problems, land use conflicts, or concerns in conjunction with the applicant's objectives. The council's decision to require or not require a concept plan to accompany an amendment shall not impact the planning commission's authority to require additional zoning support information as described in section D below. And you might remember that section, that zoning support information, we went into that quite a bit during the River Edge rezoning, where you were suggesting what additional studies should accompany the zoning amendment. So the first version of ordinances 540 it's not mandatory. It's up to the council to decide whether to require a concept plan. And the second version is prescriptive. Amendments initiated by petition must be accompanied by a concept plan. So those are the two versions you have in front of you. But it's up to your judgment and to make a recommendation on really, I wouldn't bind yourself to those two versions if you happen to have a better idea. So.
Well, I have a basic question. What is this trying to fix? Is this a problem that we have that I didn't know about?
Well, I think there's the vagueness in the language, so like it may or may not be required. So if you put must and things like that, it's making it much clearer to people that need to submit something that they need to have this before they come before the council.
But why? Why would we do that? I don't understand why we need to do that.
Well, otherwise they could come and just say, I want this rezoned, but not tell you what they're planning to do with the property.
This is asking, it's not saying that. This is saying that it wants to have a concept plan.
Mhm.
It's not, and here's where I'm a little bit concerned about this. If I went for anyone, it would be for version 1. It's that sometimes people are trying to test the waters on something. Is there even a chance that something might fly before you invest money? Anybody here have any idea how much a concept plan costs? I'll bet Sean Tucker knows.
Well, so I should have backed up a little bit. The idea is just that, is if somebody comes in and asks for an amendment, and asks for an amendment, and asks for a rezoning to change the zoning map, this provision allows the council to require a plan so they know what they're getting. And then assume that if it is rezoned, it will be conditioned on any future development being consistent with that concept plan.
Right, but have we had problems with this before? That's why I'm asking. I don't
Well,
recall any problem.
I
with
think
this.
part of this came up with because of the River Edge project, because they weren't technically required to bring a plan to us, but they did
They did.
because we had interest in seeing it. But they could have chosen not to do that, and we would have been forced to look at that project without that plan.
Then we probably would have said no too. But that's the risk that people take. So I mean, I'm not
Yeah, but I think the
law and order
idea is that
focused person,
it
but this
was-
seems like what.
it was
we-
especially helpful when we had that project to have that concept plan. So I
We
think
can always ask.
the idea is,
But
well,
that,
the thing is, it's not required at all now.
Okay.
The first version said may require, second version says it must be required.
and,
But
and
the
Have we
idea is-
ever had a project come before
Hang-
this
hang on.
council?
just
Yeah.
one quick question, Chris. Does Newcastle County require a concept plan to do the same thing? Because the sense I got was that this also brings us into the same requirements that Newcastle County has. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar with the day-to-day rezoning issues with Newcastle County, but it's my understanding that it happens quite often. Whether it's codified, I don't know.
It might be to bring us more in alignment with what the county already requires.
Maybe, but that's not actually presented here.
True.
Um,
Well, it probably wouldn't be without an
well,
explanation.
as a reason, I mean, one of the problems that I have in general working on this committee is that stuff gets thrown down the chute at us and then we have no idea of context. And this is another one. So, I'd be willing to support version 1 because it allows a choice. But, I definitely would not support number 2.
Anybody else have any comment?
My issue with first version with, whether or not council requires it is possible bias. People who are required to bring it versus people who are not required. Whether it's perceived or not, whether, there could be, some type of perceived bias by council, who they choose to present a concept plan and who they don't.
Mhm.
That's a big concern for me.
Again, are these problems that exist today? I'm unaware.
Well,
of
when
it.
you put a rule like this in, then there can be.
Well, but even now, I'm not aware this is a problem. Has this ever been a problem?
In my time, we haven't had that many rezonings that rose to the level that necessitated the request for a plan.
So rose to the level, key word. We're gonna make everybody who comes in here and says, can I please rezone where my trash can sits, put a site plan together? Or whatever, whatever small thing it is.
My recommendation is the first version. We wrote it that way, and my thinking is that we've had several small rezonings that I think. One example, it was an existing commercial use that was improperly zoned residential. And they weren't proposing anything,
Right.
or if they were, it was a fit out to a new commercial use. And I would be concerned that there may be some rezonings that are clearly mistakes that the owner would be hard pressed to come up with a concept plan, or if they did, it would just be
Doing what we're doing,
for the purposes of just meeting the requirement.
right?
So,
So it's an undue burden on people in situations like that. That's my concern.
Yeah, to the question of, does Newcastle County require, the answer is yes. According to the library.municode.com, conceptual architectural renderings of proposed site development shall be required for all rezonings and major land development plans. I think that the emphasis there too, to what Commissioner Batty is saying, is that it rises to the level. I agree then with your position, to go with version 2, which says must, seems to be an undue burden.
And maybe we put the word major, because you just read the word major.
Right.
See, I mean, there's little people trying to do things, and we're gonna put a burden on them that's not fair.
And rather than have the word major, would it be possible to, because major is relative, can we do it anything over like a quarter of an acre or an acre or? Go ahead, Chris. You wanna
I was
say-
just gonna say that we don't, that word major, I'm sure, has a definition associated with it. We don't have a definition associated with major development plan. So, I wouldn't use the term major because it wouldn't mean anything unless we add
We have to have,
a
we can always,
definition.
add a defined term in here if you want to do that, but.
Well, they may have used that term, like you said, because it was defined and it was because it required it. So if you were considered major development and it was then required for you. We, as Chris said, I don't know that we really need to add that, because I don't, it's not currently defined, and if they have the option.
If we
Either
go
or.
with one, I could live with that.
Yeah.
Maybe the AC.
Maybe it's the AC. Are we having an earthquake?
Bill, I don't feel anything
Yeah.
shaking.
The other question, I think Commissioner Batty pointed it out, and I am a little bit concerned. So this came to us by way of council. The council asked us to adopt this, to tell them what we were going to do. I mean,
This is all we can do is recommend.
all right, so we're making a recommendation that they will then.
They'll do what they
Yes.
want.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's an irony. Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Is it possible to ask for further clarification from council for this as to why?
No,
The
I think,
history, the reasoning.
I think we're on it. I think, Councilman Day wanted the city zoning ordinance to better or to be more reflective of the county's process. And, it's his feeling that requiring a concept plan with a rezoning is an appropriate thing to do. So this is how the system works. The council wants to change the zoning ordinance. They ask staff to come up with some language. It comes here first for this type of discussion and for a recommendation. So
Gotcha.
they will, after you make your recommendation, they will have their own public hearing and they will have a second reading and they will make a decision.
I can live with version one.
I need a motion, I guess.
Yes.
I move that we recommend to the Newcastle City Council that they adopt the version one of the ordinance, which says the council may require the petition. But it's not required in every case.
And I second Commissioner Batty's motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Gibbs.
All in favor?
Wait
Wait a minute, discussion?
Now it's time for discussion.
Any further discussion? I was gonna ask if we wanna give council the option of defining,
Why they want to do this?
well, that too, but defining under what terms it may be required. Or ask that they clarify that in.
Sure.
Well, I would
leave it.
vote on what's in front of you.
Okay, we
If
can do
they-
that. All right, so any other discussion on the recommendation? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the concept plan review and recommendation for 610 West 7th Street. So I'm assuming somebody out there is presenting this. if you could tell me who you are, and I think we have a PowerPoint that we will attempt to make work.
Thank you, Chairperson. For the record, my name is Sean Tucker, I'm a land use attorney here in Delaware, and I represent the applicant this evening, Freedom Development. As a housekeeping matter, just to give you the folks that you're going to hear from this evening. We have my client here, John Jaffe, Freedom Development, our architect, Thomas McKenna, our engineer, who was here. I think we have 2 engineers here. We have Trevor Burr.
Can you raise your hand? Okay,
And in place of Mark Ziegler, we have
Right, with.
Greg Swift. Greg. Mr. Ziegler's out of town with the family this weekend, couldn't be here. We have our traffic engineer, Nicole Klein.
and who was the owner? Oh, there you are,
And
okay.
John Jaffe.
If you could ask Mr. Tucker to please speak up.
Oh, sure.
Mr. Tucker, please speak up. I don't think the mic is working.
Mic is
It's
not
not
working.
working. Okay, that's what I was, okay, I'll be a little louder. Thank you.
So use your outdoor voice.
And also we have Bill Ganks, who is here, who's, I'm going to ask to go first, just because he has another commitment. And he is a commercial broker. And he's somebody that we spoke to about the viable uses from at least a marketing standpoint in this area of the city. And with that, we do have a PowerPoint presentation. We did purchase a laser pointer that is supposed to work on TVs. It doesn't work on this TV, but I can say it did work on one in Newark. So I'm not sure what magical TV they have or screen they have, but it was impressive. That it did work on that one. We were sad to find out it will not work on yours. So apologize for that in advance, and I will try my best to walk you through the PowerPoint without a pointer.
Let me know if you need me to point something.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm?
So, guys, could you, come on? Please. So the property, as is advertised, is located on Route 9.
I think we need to move it. Who's moving the PowerPoint?
I think I have the button here.
Okay,
Yeah, and I just to put things in context, this is a concept plan review. And your code makes clear that the purpose of a concept plan is for the planning commission, all of you, certainly to informally review the development proposed prior to the submittal or submission of substantial commitment of time and expense on the part of the applicant in preparing a site plan. So a site plan would come in the process as we move forward. But you first get to look at the concept plan. We then would, based on your recommendation, go to the Board of Adjustment, and we come back to you with a full-fledged site plan submission, which requires more time, expense, and money. And it appears to me that the purpose of this section is if there is a very negative reaction to an application, that an applicant's not spending a lot of time and money pursuing it, and has the option of reconsidering the first plan and or the property in general. So it's a fairly recent addition to your code, and I think it certainly makes a lot of sense. So we are in that very early phase. We did this in part for the Parkway gravel application that came up tonight, although there were some additional elements to that. We also did the same for the George Valaskakis application that I guess that was in about half a year ago that we were in front of you for that, just off of Delaware Avenue. That ultimately has not advanced the Board of Adjustment. Well, strike that. Did advance the Board of Adjustment, but it's not come back to all of you. And just to orient you, this is the current property. It's made up of 2 parcels off of Route 9, and it encompasses about 16.5 acres. And this is actually an aerial of the site. It might be a year or so old, depending on the computer file that was available, but that gives you a sense of the property today. It is vacant. It's an old finery that closed down well over 2 decades ago. And there are some contaminants on the property that have been identified, some metals, as I understand it, that would be cleaned up as part of this effort. Before diving into that in much more detail, however, I'd like to ask Bill a few questions, so that he can get to his other matter, about the area and about the uses. And Bill, if you could, for the record, identify yourself by your full name and your background.
My name is Bill Gantz. I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I've been doing that for 22 years.
And Bill, did there come a time when you looked at this general area of the city of Newcastle and assessed the viability of this area for possible commercial uses?
Yes,
And are you quite familiar with this property?
very.
How long have you been involved in one way or another in considering this property and its development?
Probably at least a dozen years.
And does that date back to when the Seeds of Greatness Church was originally looking at this property?
Correct, yes.
And in your assessment as a real estate broker in the area, and you were licensed in Delaware, is that correct?
Correct. Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania.
Do you have an opinion as to the viability of a commercial retail type project on this property, given its location in the city?
My opinion, if you never looked at it.
Okay. And are you familiar with the garrison that's built somewhat, maybe probably less than a tenth of a mile to the east?
Yes, and my understanding is that the apartments are 100% occupied, but the retail element is nowhere near that.
And how long has that project been in existence? You know?
5 to 7 years, maybe.
Thank you. That was all I had for Bill. I know if there's questions from planning commission, he needs to get to another meeting.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
You just said retail at the Garrison is not fully occupied. Is that going to be part of the argument that that's why you don't want to put any retail in this place?
Yes, well,
Yeah.
yes, but mostly, almost entirely not, but there's a little nuance to that, yes.
Well, because the whole downtown gateway plan was trying to encourage people to have community life.
Sure.
And while I understand that the Garrison might not have been able to garner enough human beings to keep anything other than the little deli open, no, we're looking at adding thousands of people now, which would change the complexion of the area completely. So when I'm thinking about the objectives of the downtown gateway program, that's going to be on my mind as we ask questions going forward. So the failure of the Garrison to have retail doesn't strike me as an argument that is valid.
And I'll address what we're proposing on our site to address the folks that would live at this location, because we are going to propose something on that.
Okay,
As
good.
well,
All right,
because
thank
your
you.
point's well taken. But we also need a viable project that we
course.
can rent.
Understand.
And so we have to balance those things in the marketplace. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to give you a perspective that we do consult with folks. We talk to experts like Bill. And the reason is my client wants to build a viable project. Because if we build it and nobody comes, that is not a good equation. for the banks, not a good equation for viability long term. And so I always like to show towards what we look at before we go too far down the tracks on the project.
Okay. How many units is the Garrison? Just remind me.
I don't have to get back. I'll have to
About
get back to
150?
I think it might be that or a little bit more.
Okay, because you're talking about adding 400 units, so it's really gonna change the population of that area.
Yes, but again, we're going to propose a use there that would service those folks.
Okay.
Yeah, which is a fair question.
What makes this property not viable for commercial use?
So in my opinion, I don't see people wanting to go there to shop. So when I think about retail, I think about all different types of retail. I wouldn't put my money in it. That, and if somebody came to me to develop it and asked me to be on board with that, and I'm gonna have to do the leasing, that's probably not something I'm gonna get involved in. Because there's an old saying that we always say, I don't need to push elephants up a hill. If I put retail there, it's gonna be like pushing an elephant up the hill trying to fill it. And
Depends
then
on
somebody puts a lot of money into it, and then I can't deliver to be able to fill it.
And retail would be the only commercial option you were looking at when you state that.
Well, see, on commercial, apartments fall under commercial for us. Maybe an industrial element, like, if you had somebody who would build a big warehouse there. But then I don't know that DG really fits, the industrial warehouse doesn't really fit the DG. The DJ kind of, I don't want to say it handcuffs you, but it kind of changes the game a bit. So a church would have been a great fit there, but that we just couldn't seem to get it done in the time. We couldn't get the zoning in place. And they couldn't wait longer, so they went someplace else. So church, the school, apartments, they're good fits there. Retail itself, yeah, that's my opinion.
Is part of the hindrance also the amount of cleanup that would be required for that site also?
Hindering,
Like commercial space being built on that because the cost of cleaning that and,
They have to clean it up no matter what, though.
and the,
Could Denrec will fund a bunch of that?
from Denmark Engineering.
No, we gotta do this in order. We gotta do this in order. Thank you. Just bear with me. We'll get to you.
Okay.
So the question, I think, Bill, is the fact you'd have to clean it up, one of the things that you're relying upon to say that commercial, in your opinion, doesn't work there?
same cleanup, whether it's the apartments, whether it's retail, whether it's,
yeah, but I didn't know like value wise, you'll probably get more with, I guess, the apartments and income than you would with the retail to offset those.
not
expenses.
necessarily, because the apartments have a bigger investment to build it.
Mhm.
So it all kind of balances out. The cleanup's the same. The cleanup's the cleanup is the cleanup. And so whether you build apartments or you build retail, the apartments cost you more, you get a bigger bank, return on you get a good return on your money if it's full. If it's not full, you don't. Same thing with retail. You might be able to build retail for less than the apartments, but net value of income is going to be less because there's less units, less people, less investment. However, nobody wants to build vacant retail.
You could make an argument that there's retail in the Garrison and maybe that fills the slack too. I mean. So, anyway.
Go ahead.
I appreciate your expertise and the amount of time that you spent on this property. Has there been any market studies to back up what you're saying, specific to this property or ones on similar properties in the area?
The market study we do is we send it to somebody and say, what do you think? And they go, thanks, appreciate it, talk to you later. I mean, that's our market.
Fair enough.
Hey, I have a great parcel. I think we could do this and maybe we could do retail. And they go, yeah, thanks, done. Just give me something else. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but that's our world.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for waiting. I know you had something.
That's right.
One of the things, I'm sure Chris probably does this routinely, but about every 4 or 5 years, I'm able to get out to sort of a national planning seminar. And one of the things that I commonly hear, and it was probably pre-COVID the last time I was at one in Oregon, I think it was, but one of the things I hear a lot is, it's always good to certainly plan well and for what is most ideal, but if the market does not align with that, then nothing happens, nothing gets done. And I see this dilemma come up from time to time where, as Ms. Patty indicated, the DJ Downtown Gateway District does encourage that. But it's a big district. This isn't the only property in the district, and it's connected to other properties that are also in that district. Like George's, for example, George Velskakis is. And if the market isn't there, folks won't come. And in this instance, this property has been vacant for over 2 decades. And there's only been one other entity interested in advancing a plan to this board. And as Bill Ganks indicated, that was Seeds of Greatness Church. It's my understanding I wasn't involved with that application until later, but when it came to this board, I'm told that it was viewed favorably. And the owner of the property shared that with me tonight. But ultimately, I understood when it got to council, it ran into some bumps. And so they did ultimately build it, and that's when I got involved with it down across from the farmers market area. And I understand it's a very nice church, and they do a lot of great work. But this is the only second, as I understand it, only the second person or entity that's been interested in the property since. And again, these are things I look at as a land use attorney when I make presentations. You know, what can we do to clean up the site? We'll certainly talk a little bit about the contaminants on there. We have an expert here who's anxious to jump in. We'll get there and appreciate the eagerness. Explain what's there, and this is, you know, only the second opportunity in over 20 years to have a user there that is prepared to clean up the site and spend the money. And just to drill down a little bit more, just to break out the site, here's the two parcels that are involved, 15 acres and about 1.5. That's relevant to the standard. Here's just another vantage point, another aerial, a little bit more colorful, that shows you its present state. Again, this is a condition that's been there for about 20 years. I used to travel to the beach and use Route 9 a lot. My wife and I rented in Old Newcastle when I was in school. This was our favorite route, as far back as I can remember. This site was either the finery that was there is now gone or looked like this. And just to give you an idea of the character of the area, it's the west side of the parcel, what you would see driving by. Again, west side. And we would be, this parcel's on to the right of that. And here it says site plan, but it is a concept plan with an overlay. So this is a rendering by the engineering firm of McBride and Ziegler that shows the layout of the proposal of apartments over top or, you know, overlaid on the property to give you some sense of scale and open space and where the parking would be located. And the buffering you can see to the east, which right now is proposed at about 100 feet. To the south, you see a different type of use, but to the east, we see the residential use. And so there's a 100-foot buffer proposed there in the concept. And again, this is a concept. We welcome input on these concepts always. Part of this process is us learning what the planning commission likes and doesn't like before we, you know, lock into any final design. So what we think, we hope you like, but if you have other ideas or perhaps conditions on your recommendation, we certainly understand that that's part of the process. It's supposed to be collaborative. But this is what we have thought through and wanted to present to you this evening.
Can I ask a definitional question?
Sure.
The state report talked about buffers, and I can see that you've built in spaces to allow for access to the wetlands and things like that. What is the difference between that and this buffer? I just don't understand the.
Sure. So the state is plus comments, which I assume.
Plus, yeah.
Under recommendations, it means there's not a state law that requires it, but they often comment on things that they'd like to see. I believe they talk about green filter strips or some type of biofiltration, not required by the city code, not required by DENREC's code. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but there's of course an expense that comes with that. This buffer was more about providing distance between us and the residential to our east.
Okay.
It was not driven by that comment. You know, that we do see that comment from DENREC quite often.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Didn't they just spend about $50,000 in that drainage ditch in next door?
I'm sorry.
They get federal dollars?
I'm sorry, but we're limiting comments to
Oh, I
Mr.
got,
Pepper right
yeah,
now.
I see that.
So our engineer will comment on the stream and give some background on that, which is not quite there yet. Also, part of what we wanted to share with you tonight, and this goes to Ms. Patty's question earlier, is we are, again, this is a concept, but we are proposing up to about 5,000 square feet of non-residential. And I'm going to show you an exhibit that just is a very rough exhibit about where that would go and what that would look like. They could certainly go in any corner of the apartments. And the example I'm going to give you is about a 3,500 square foot example. We certainly recognize that people who would live here would need a convenient location where they could walk and shop for groceries, for milk, for detergent, amenities like that. Perhaps you could have a nail salon, perhaps, maybe not another deli, but some other use that would be walkable for the folks that would live there, because we do think from talking to people like Bill Ganks, that there is some commercial market that will be there, to your point,
Yeah.
Ms. Patty. But, the idea that we would be able to attract others, any significant distance, the experts tell us that that's just not viable, but it doesn't mean in the future that couldn't change. But that is what we're being told by the experts.
I don't think we're thinking shopping mall, we're thinking convenience. Yeah,
And so ultimately, for example, if this board thought 5,000 wasn't enough, we certainly would be open to other numbers. But this is what my client was comfortable with based on his conversation and his experience. But again, we're not perfect. This is what we were proposing, which we thought the market could handle. And certainly folks who walk by could use it too. It wouldn't be limited to just residents, but we want to propose something that we think is economically viable.
So,
Yes.
sorry,
No, no.
Mr. Tucker, at the 3,300 square feet, how many apartments would that eliminate?
We would eliminate 4.
Okay.
It's a good question. I got a slide on that as well. So here you go. Actually, that was good. Perfect segue. So this is just an example of a 34-43 footprint. It could be multiple tenants. That would replace like one apartment section in any one of those buildings, but ideally you'd probably want it on the road. But we could go to 5 and we could replace another one. It just gets into that balance that my client, would understandably want to do between what units you could lease or likely lease versus what would stay vacant. So at the Garrison, for example, there's, as I understand it, there's a water ice tenant. There is the deli, but then the other space next to it, I understand, is the business office for, renting the apartments. And you do need that someplace ideally, but I would speculate a little bit, but I'm pretty sure that's probably there because they can't rent the space. And hopefully that will come over time, but it is an expensive proposition to build something at least. And so again, it's the market naturally weighs that in deciding what to propose to all of you in the city and designing these concepts. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, so, and maybe I'm just jumping ahead, but, so you're suggesting that the retail probably be one of the 2 buildings that fronts on 7th Street. I would tell you one of my perceptions, and I've only been over there to those shops at the Garrisons like once, but the limited parking that's available really doesn't help their retail at all. So if you're gonna have retail, you need to make sure there's gonna be sufficient parking. I mean, granted, you're hoping mostly the people in that community are gonna walk there. People are crazy. They sometimes get in their car to drive from one end of the parking lot to the other. I've done that myself. But there needs to be some sufficient parking because other people might want to, on their way home, stop and.
Sure. And one of the things we look at along those lines is we are proposing right now approximately 594 spaces. And you're right, we do presume, because it would be an accessory use, it would be more for the folks who live there and less for folks that would drive elsewhere, but it is certainly possible. In a final site plan, depending on additional analysis, we may come back to you and propose some more parking spots and perhaps fewer number of apartments. But right now, conceptually, with the 594 spaces, which is based on about a 1.5, I think it's 1.5 parking spots per unit. That's where we got, which is a pretty significant amount of parking, which is also, is internal, trying to keep that away from immediate view on the street, which is part of the DP standard we're going to strive for. So existing character in the area, we certainly looked around to see what we had nearby, and here's a good example of the Helm at Deaver's Landing. There's no commercial here. This site is also shown as a mixed use in the DG on the comp plan. It's older certainly than the Garrison, but it has a similar comp plan designation. And then, and that's actually a picture of the comp plan. Where you see that mixed use designation, it is all residential, other than an office, I think, but the business office. And then you see, when we're just talking about the Garrison Apartments, and there is the deli on the corner and then the water ice next to it. That also shares that same district DG designation and the comp plan recommended map for future uses. And again, you see the sort of connection of all the different parcels that have that light blue, which is the DG for the gateway. And while again, it does encourage a mix of uses, the comp plan doesn't say that all has to happen on one parcel. That can be adding multiple parcels over time as it grows, certainly. But you're not locked in under the comp plan, and based on anything I've read, to have you do that on any one parcel. And again, I used the Valaskakis application as just an example of that. That was also DG, and that was all residential. Smaller site, certainly, but same principle. This is an aerial perspective prepared by our landscape architect, just to give you some sense of a rendering of how the site would be built out. And just to give you a sense of the units and the style that my client is proposing, and again, this says 396, but it would actually be 392 with the commercial component that you saw proposed conceptually. And so you see the use of masonry. You see some gray vinyl, a heavy duty grade vinyl certainly, but you see the use of different materials. We did that based on what we saw at the other two apartments, just to try to be consistent in character and material type, more or less. And here is a landscaping plan that was prepared by Gary Bertram, who's here. I may have failed to mention Gary when I introduced him. Sorry, Gary.
Yeah,
My apologies. Didn't mean to overlook you. But Mr. Bertram is here, who prepared the landscape plan, and I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit, and then I'm going to ask if you get up and speak a little bit about it. But you prepared this consistent with your code, and you can also talk a little bit about that buffer area to the east. Mr. Bertram, would you be kind enough to introduce yourself for the record and state your name and tell folks what you do?
Pardon me. My name is Gary Bertram. I'm a registered landscape architect here in Delaware. I've been in business for 35 years. And this is the landscape plan that I prepared for the concept plan, which would be in compliance with your ordinances. If you look through your ordinances, basically it requires 1 tree for every 5 parking spaces. So within the parking lots that we have, there are 119 trees located there. Requires 1 street tree at least per every 40 feet. And then we get into the nebulous parts of the code, which is, and I took this to heart because I know how much you guys appreciate your streetscapes. The downtown gateway district requirements basically say, create a pedestrian-oriented neighborhood commercial district and enhance the aesthetic appearance along streets, parking lots, and other pedestrian areas. That's rather nebulous. So, when I go to do this, I'm thinking, okay, what can we do to make sure that we really reinforce the definition of the street, really accentuate the buildings along the street, and try to limit, if you can go to the next slide, try to limit any use behind that into the interior area, as Mr. Tucker was saying, where the parking lots and whatnot are. So if you look along the street, can I walk over there?
Sure.
Let me do that. That way I can point to stuff. We used to really get the So this is Delaware Street running along here.
It's
I'm sorry, it's West 7th Street, yeah. Delaware Route 9. These are the buildings that adjoin it. And the buildings themselves, which I think are fairly handsome buildings, create the definition of the street. And what we're doing along with that is putting in street trees and additional landscaping on the one tree for 40 feet. And planting ground covers along the shrubs, ground covers along the face of the building to really make it a bit more exuberant. Here we have existing street trees that at this point we intend to keep. But then there's additional street trees that we're adding in that highlight the entrance to the community. As for views beyond that, you have the building that is preventing views into the parking lot. We have screening that runs along here and all along here so that those hedging would keep the views beyond into this larger area here limited. So what we're really trying to do is really emphasize the street and have it work into the overall fabric of the city.
It looks like there's walkways around all the buildings, is that correct? Like
There
sidewalks?
are,
Yes.
and I can jump ahead and highlight that real quick.
Okay.
That's a good question. Again, I apologize about the length of this, but there are a lot of standards. There we go. That's what I'm saying. So that gives you a flavor, Ms. Patty, of the sidewalk system.
Is that the blue?
Yes.
And there's also, I neglected to mention, of course, while I was up there, provide street furnishings and lighting along the sidewalks. So with every 50 feet along those sidewalks along 7th Street, we have preliminary areas for lamp posts and yeah, right along through there. If you go back, Sean.
To your original.
Yeah, the close up of the no.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm getting there. Just said, I apologize.
Oh,
There
great.
we go. There we go.
Excellent, here. These little, we're at a scale that's difficult to go over, but these little red dots here are what would theoretically be lights.
Lights.
Yes, and then I provide street furnishings, places for people to
Sit down.
sit down. So, you can have benches here at this connection point here, bench at this connection point here, a bench at this connection point here, so that you're having places for people to be outside and enliven the street.
Bertrand's going to stay with us in case the other questions come up. And have an opportunity to give you why he did what he did with this landscaping plan. And again, like other things we present, certainly if this commission's vision is different and the plant, or we hear from the public, they would like other or different plantings. We're always receptive to that and sensitive to that. So if we hear from somebody I'm sorry.
Okay, that's exactly what I might be jumping ahead, but just.
No, not at all.
to understand, are these where those wetlands, where are those wetlands that or is that a separate slide somewhere?
It's coming. It is
Okay,
coming.
just, then that's fine.
No, it's a good question, and the stream that's existing there has been modified, and there's been a lot of money spent improving that through that area there. So we are certainly preserving that water course. We're not modifying that. And there is, as you can see on the east side of the project, there's pretty substantial green buffer. And to put that a little bit more in context, the code permits impervious cover up to 80%. This site proposes 56%. So it is a pretty well preserved site, and certainly the water course has part to do with that. But it's not certainly maxed out with impervious cover. It's a lot of green that's being preserved as part of this plan. Yes.
Just because I can't read the K, does it say what kind of trees or what kind of?
They're simply, the larger, darker ones are simply canopy type trees, oaks and things of that nature, larger trees. And the smaller ones that are red and pink and magenta and whatnot, those would be smaller flowering types of trees. that you would have. One thing that I did not put on here is any kind of a planting in that buffer area that Mr. Tucker talked about before.
You must want to
That
stay.
would be. Right. That would be in through here, and the reason for that is because if you look at the plan or the aerial, there is a good bit of vegetation through here. But I don't want to mislead anybody. I don't know where that vegetation is, so I did not put it on the plan. But, you know, what we have here is already to some degree treed and whatnot, but you know, that would
So the
be,
plan would be not to disrupt that.
that's what I always try to do in things is to, you know, utilize what you've already got and save it.
No, I haven't touched that.
And then if you need to, you can augment it. Or if it's not something that's worth keeping, then you can remove it and
And
replace.
the type of trees would come at a later date, like, native trees.
Well, the plus plan asked for it to be native as much as possible.
Oh,
and
I
think that's
I
what we
use
would
native
say too.
plants
Yeah,
pretty much exclusively.
yeah. Okay, good.
So again, that area that's wetlands,
You know, I'll advance to that, just because.
Okay, well-
We'll get there anyway, so let me do that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's, this is the give and take that I think is helpful to make for a better plan, truly. So, let me get to that. We have our environmental consultant here who can. Yeah, I know, there's a lot, it is.
There is an Eagles game. in
It's this darn code somebody wrote. I don't know if they're here tonight. And we'll move through these briskly once we get along here.
Once we stop asking questions.
No, we're covering a lot of this as you asked your questions, ironically, since it all works. I promise. Is it the last thing? Okay. There, I see one, there we go. So, no, almost there. No, not the last one. Well, here we go, my apologies. And this may require Mr. Swift's assistance as well, no, Evie. So perhaps this would be a good time for you to assist Mr. Burkett, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Talk about the wetlands.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he's enjoying the part.
The colors mean.
Sorry, Doug Seeley from Landmark Engineering. The green is the wetland that was there by nature. That's the one that's been there, well, for a long time. The blue one was reconstructed by the Newcastle Conservation Board in 2009, approximately, because they want to improve the drainage from across the railroad, because this was meandering and that had very poor water flow, but also because during our sampling in 2009, we found this wetlands were contaminated. And that they were causing impact to the environment, so that they should be capped. And so as part of that plan, the conservation district put in this new wetland over here. And it has like a floodplain in it and a flood storage and increased flow so the water doesn't cause as much flooding up here. Part of the plan for this is to fill these wetlands because they are contaminated and they do cause impacts to the environment.
Mr. Seavey, could you for a clear record, as I understand it, they had originally been filled without a permit?
The plan was to build, they were not actually built at
Okay,
the time.
good.
There was, they had the permit to build them back in 2009, because the plan, when these wetlands were constructed, the plan was to build these wetlands. And, but they had a nationwide permit 38 from the Army Corps to fill these wetlands, which only applies to brownfield sites. When the Seeds Grayson's Church stopped working on the site, it stopped being a brownfield at the time.
And so the Army Corps said, well, you don't have that permit to fill wetlands anymore. There's another permit you can fill, apply with National Permit 27, which allows you basically to replace low quality wetlands with new higher quality wetlands. And for some reason, the Conservation District did not do so. They never applied, and so the Army Corps didn't have to fill it in. We have talked to them in 2019. We met with the Philadelphia District Permit Chief Todd Horniman, and he said that, yeah, those permits still apply. You can still apply for 38 to National Permit 38 to fill this wetland in because it is still an environmental impact to the ground.
So to be crystal clear, there was a permit, it expired.
Expired, and
Because now we've been told.
we got told by Army Corps that, yeah, you can definitely get that permit again. Just you have to apply for it.
The reason it's okay to fill those is because that area is contaminated.
Correct, and it is contaminated because during the 2009 sampling, we took 8 surface water samples and 8 sediment samples from this area, and there were high levels of metals which are impacting the downwater gradient water.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what those metals and contaminants were?
The contaminants we found on the site are elevated. That metal is mostly manganese, iron, some chromium, and other metals from the foundry use. We also found a couple of locations that had elevated levels of polyaromatic hydrocarbons fuel, basically probably from oil coal that got buried on the site from
The
one of the
gas
foundry.
tank that might have been there?
We didn't find any evidence of
I know
the
the
gas
gas
tanks.
tanks.
There were gas tanks that got removed well before my day. I think it's before the foundry was shut down, like 2090 or in the early 90s. The tanks were removed then. At the time, they found no evidence of the tanks leaking, but there is just coal buried on the site, probably from old industrial use that was the foundry.
Oh, going back quite a way.
Yes.
Okay, so the plus comments were, don't disturb the wetlands, but you're saying because those wetlands are contaminated, we should consider basically getting rid of them.
Yes, because and basically just keeping the new wetlands over here that were created, not
Okay.
the old wetlands, because at the time the wetlands were created, the initial intention was to fill these wetlands here
Okay,
because they are very low quality wetlands and they are contaminated.
do we know if there's any wildlife or is the contaminants keeping the wildlife away?
I've been on site probably about 10 times. We've never seen, but there's vegetation growing there. But the vegetation in the created wetlands is actually much higher quality than in here. They have to assume there are birds living there, probably some deer, but they will, there's no endangered threatened species in there. And the animals that are living there will probably just move over here or down over the other road.
So my understanding of fixing a brownfield kind of goes to your capping so that whatever's still in there, the rainwater can't get to it to continue it to leach into the groundwater?
Yes, was the plan in 2009 because we didn't find any like hot spots or really bad areas, general elevated levels in other parts of the entire site. And so at that time, the plan the Denver agreed to was to cap the site 2 feet of fill.
Oh, okay, you're gonna cap it with fill,
Right.
okay.
And that also don't spoil something early, but that also takes out of the floodplain area. Choose.
Anybody else on the commission?
This was covered in the plus review. So, and the whole Army Corps of Engineers thing was covered in there too, so.
And one thing he did was to drill down on this very issue, and Chris was kind enough to set up a call with us to talk a little bit about his concerns in this regard. But I mentioned in his comment letter is just recently we met with DENREC staff and went over what had been initially investigated. This was back when it was the Seeds of Greatness application that the CV initially got involved. and what their expectations were. And they did prepare a supplemental letter, and I did bring one copy on that. The PowerPoint was so long, I didn't have the.
Hard to add any.
Hard to add, yeah. It's true, I just couldn't do it to you. But on September 22nd, 43, they did submit a letter that we did share with the city, because we just got it on Friday. I think the same day we got it, we shared it. And they are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. C, because you're the expert and did the original plan. They're aware of the filling of the wetlands that are undesirable because of the contamination.
That's correct, yes. That was presented to them in 2009, and they thought that, they approved that idea.
Okay, and what has happened is they do want us to retest, because quite a bit of time has gone by since 2019, to make sure there hasn't been new dumping on the site. I hope there hasn't, but if there has, that would cause them some concern. So we do have to retest and confirm what was originally done out there, and as long as that shows normal, and I'll just quote, and I'll put this in the record, Gina Maricine. Denrick RS maintains that placement of a 2-foot cap will likely be sufficient to render the site suitable for residential development. So there's a capping that goes over the entire site as part of this type of application, which would include certainly the contaminated wetland areas, but certainly would not include that area to the east that is currently recreated wetlands that's presently operating today. Yes.
Who would besides Denrick, who would oversee the brownfield reclamation? Would that be you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and so the fill that you get, where do you get that fill, and how do you ensure that that fill isn't contaminated?
We have to, that's a great question. We have to sample all the fill before it comes on the site. And
Okay.
I believe it's one sample for every 3,000 cubic yards. And so that will have to be sampled before it comes on the site. So the source of it, that depends, that is kind of up to whoever can find fill.
Well, but knowing you're testing it
Yes, we do test it
answers
all.
the question.
Yes, and it has to be approved by Denrick before it can go on the site.
Okay. But yeah, because I wouldn't want to contaminate it further.
Right.
Is this a process that has to be done again? Like, is it to refill it, or you have to do it like,
Kind of once and done.
yeah, you do it one time?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then-
you cap it, you fill it once it's done, yes.
Okay, you don't have to come back to do
No.
that again.
Not unless you
Or you'll, like,
disturb the
settle it.
soil.
Right, not disturb soil, and anytime they, in the future, they do disturb the soil, they have to have somebody like me coming over to oversee the site, make sure that nothing's, basically make sure no one's eating the dirt or anything like that.
Okay. Good enough.
There's actually a state law obligation where if there's something found that wasn't found before that is a certain level of contamination, as I understand it, Mr. Sweeney, you have a duty to report it.
Yes, yeah, we have, anything we find out there, we have to do, I think, 27 more shallow samples, 27 medium, like top 2 feet, 27 deep, another 5 wells, more sediment, more sample before Denrick approves or even capping the site. And so that will happen, and they all have to be approved by Denrick.
Okay, and will we get to see a copy of that plan that's approved by Denrick for what's
As part of the site plan, we would anticipate
Okay.
providing that to you.
Perfect.
If we advance forward.
And, okay, you alluded to something else. You're gonna put 2 feet of fill where that dirt is, or where the green is.
Yeah.
But that's gonna make that 2 feet higher than the rest of the place.
So for the capping would have to occur, of course, the entire is being constructed upon.
Oh, it'll be the
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
site's gonna get the
They
2
gotta
feet.
do the,
Okay, just
the
wanted
height,
to make sure that was. You were getting the whole thing and not just one
No.
little hill over there.
Right.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go back to the,
Okay.
Not the
I think
beginning.
I think we're chiseling away at the factors and it all works. Looking at it a completely different way with, it's probably a good time to do the sea level.
oh, since you're already back there?
Yes. The other way, yeah. No, I think it's this way. I was going to towards the end. Probably a good time to cover this. So, as you probably recall from the Parkway application, Denrec has a comment that they issue pretty standard now in their recommendation section, not in, it's the law section. Where they ask or recommend that we look at sea level rise projections. So it's at the 2050 mark, which is in a worst case scenario, they calculate to 2 feet. And it's actually 0.9 to 2 feet is sort of this envelope that they give. And I'm sorry, I said 2050, it's actually 20. Oh, I'm sorry.
2030
And I think these are actually mislabeled perhaps. I think that should be 2100 for the 5 foot. I'm pretty sure. So I think there's a little bit of a typo there, but this is the 2100 at 2 to 5 feet. And then this should be the 2050, 0.9 to 2 feet. So I think there's just a typo there. My apologies. And what we do is we use the Denrec tool online because it's their comment. And so we looked at the site, and McBride Ziegler prepared this. Greg Swift is here, Trevor Burr is here to testify to this if you have any specific questions. We asked them to look at that and see what happened on the site. So in the 2050, even though it says 2030, it's 2050 modeling. There was no sea level rise impact on this site. However, when you move to which should have been the 2100, which is a 5 foot, worst case scenario, because the range is 2 feet to 5 feet, or 1.9 feet to 5 feet, I think would be more specific for the Denrec letter. There is an impact, and let me drill down into that a little bit. So in the 5 foot sea level rise, and again, this is using the tool online. It's not perfect. There's a lot of modeling that goes into this, but this is the first look at it. And again, we're using the Denrec website, and it's Denrec's comment. This is the infiltration you would see in a 5-year sea level rise estimated by McBride Ziegler based on that online tool from Denrec. However, this can be addressed because you heard about the 2 feet of fill. And so when you do the fill, it's estimated for the site. Again, this is conceptual and preliminary. Based on McBride Ziegler's calculations, we would protect the structures. The infrastructure would be outside of that 5 foot worst case scenario. And again, subject to more detailed surveying and design that would be done as we move through the process. But this was McBride Ziegler's preliminary analysis based on all the data, raising the site up approximately 2 feet and using that tool. And I just like to confirm that for the record with Mr. Swift. Is that correct?
It's not gonna flood the site, but it's gonna flood other areas.
Well, I don't.
If you raise it.
So you can see, just to drill down into this with facts, you can see on the corner, there is a residential property. And I think that's the gentleman who's speaking up. His site does not go underwater. In fact, excuse me. You just see this edge here, right there, based on this modeling. So that is a residential property today. And you can see in this scenario with the fill, you're not seeing this property inundated, except maybe this corner here in a 5 foot worst case scenario. And that's by year 2100. It could be, but we would,
We'll have both.
yes, or maybe planes or cars that fly, excuse me. So we wanted to be sensitive to that, and we wanted to be thoughtful, and we did have a civil engineer look at that.
Are you gonna put that in
We
here?
will continue to look at that.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question?
What?
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
So did you say there's going to be 2 feet of additional fill?
The cap, as I understand it from Denrec, does require 2 feet.
The
So
paper
it might be
slope
2
to
foot
5
just
feet.
total. When you say additional, it might
Yeah,
just be 2 feet.
Forget the idea of the cap for now, as far as filling to raise the site. For sea level rise purposes or floodplain purposes, there's gonna be 2 foot of additional fill on top of the existing grade.
It's possible that some of the existing grade could be taken down once we get along with the design, but we're anticipating approximately a 2 foot increase at the end of the day, subject to final engineering.
My point being is you had the same sort of approach in addressing sea level rise on another project, and we never really talked about the impacts to the 100-year floodplain, given, you know, the bathtub model of a 2 foot rise in sea level. So we see that it's not going to be inundated by the sea, but we don't see what the impact is to the 100-year floodplain as a result of a sea level rise scenario.
That is true, and even FEMA won't model that because they will tell you can't model that. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, we did call and ask, it came up with Parkway, as you may recall, Mr. Rogers, and that was the answer that we got from DENREC, because we did want to look at that. I can say, and I did ask Mr. Ziegler specifically, because I knew we had a residential neighbor, you know, what would the modeling using the current map that he's using online, that going to 5 feet is a pretty big speculation when you get to the data they're using. But we're trying to be thoughtful about that. But with the bathtub model, I don't believe, in fact, I'm sure based on our interaction with DENREC that they don't model, that FEMA does not model that.
It's hard to predict the future.
So what is I'm sorry.
No, go ahead,
What's
go ahead.
the first floor elevation then?
I'll ask Mr. Swift to come up and talk about
Yeah.
that, if I may, just because I want to be accurate. He's our engineer.
Yeah, my name is Greg Swift. I'm with McBride and Ziegler. And the FEMA floodplain,
And I did bring that slide up just for
is
reference.
on the site is for the most part elevation 9. And so we intend to have the grade in the parking lot a foot above that. So the grades in the parking lot around that building will be at minimum elevation 10. And the finished floors of those apartments will be a foot and a half above that minimum. This is at concept at this point, but we haven't done all the grading of the site and all that sort of thing. But at this stage, our plan is to grade the site so that the parking lot is in general elevation, minimum elevation 10. And the finished floor and minimum elevation of the first floor would be 11.
Mr. Swift, could you explain to some novices like me what elevation 8, 9, and 10 means?
Yeah, it's their contours, like the sea level, you could consider elevation 0 if you want to start there. And all the elevations, we go up
Oh, so that would be the feet above sea level.
feet above sea level.
Okay,
yes.
okay, just want to make sure I'm clear.
And Mr. Swift, could you try to reconcile the 2 feet with the 1 foot? Like, we know that DENREC is probably going to require 2 feet of fill, but
As you mentioned, as you mentioned earlier, we're going to assure that the site and the buildings are above the FEMA floodplain as well. So we have 2 things that we have to consider. It's the 2 foot of fill for the remediation of the wetlands, but we also are going to raise the site to make sure we're above the FEMA floodplain, so that the buildable area on that site, not where the restoration of the stream was, but in all the other areas, it's going to be above elevation 9, which is the FEMA floodplain elevation.
Mr. Swift, is a clomar ultimately required?
Though we will have a clomar.
Can you explain why that matters and how
And
that?
what it is?
Yeah, we will apply to the Army Corps of Engineers to fill that site, to place it above the FEMA floodplain. And what we'll do is we'll submit our plan to FEMA, showing what our plan is. And then once the plan is implemented, we will be required by FEMA to show that, an as-built plan, we call it, to show that indeed we graded it as per the plan. And that we certify that indeed is happening. And then we get a permit from FEMA that takes that ground that we raised out of the floodplain.
And what's the current elevation right now? Do you know?
Yeah, there is one slide, if you want to know exactly. It's kind of complicated. Much of the ground is above elevation 9, but all the areas that are below elevation 9 are in the current FEMA floodplain.
Okay,
There's a slide that.
so it's not like it's at elevation 50 or something,
No.
but it's pretty,
No, much of it is above elevation 9. Above the
okay,
Ready. But
okay.
the area is close to 7th Street. Much of that is below elevation 9.
Oh, yeah, it does kind of. Which,
Where there's like the sections 8, this is 9, this is 10.
Yeah, it varies
Yeah.
through the site.
It varies through the site there. And to be quite clear, there is a section on the site that most of the site, the FEMA floodplain is elevation 9. There's a small section, a pocket in the middle. That's the FEMA floodplain is elevation 8, oddly, and it's from wave action. And without explaining it further, there's some wave action that causes some areas to be even below elevation 9 in the FEMA floodplain. And there is a little pocket in the middle that's at elevation 8, but for the most part, we're going to be above elevation 10
Okay.
and above the FEMA floodplain.
And sorry, you said first floor is gonna be at 11.
And this is we're at concept, a conceptual stage now, but our plan is to be, the finished floors of the first floor of the building will be above elevation 11.5. And the ground outside the building will be above elevation 10.
Wait. I was gonna say the slide, but I'll wait to get this question.
What happens to all the water that was gonna be there? I mean, that would have settled, and what was the drainage
The,
situation, cause Route 9 floods
If it was in
everywhere.
the game, go to Marsh.
the floodplain there is caused by the Delaware River and the tidal water coming in from the Delaware. And the result of it will be that less water will come in from the Delaware River, if that makes sense.
No,
As part of the filling operation and as part of the Clomar, that's administered by the city as well. The city, Jeff Bergstrom, is the floodplain administrator for the city of Newcastle. So there's a local component to the Clomar and the filling and the changing of the floodplain. And one of the things that is looked at is to make sure that filling in a floodplain does not have a detrimental effect on other properties. And when you're talking about such a large watershed and such a large basin, there's no amount of fill that you can do here that's gonna cause an increase or a rise in the flooding on adjacent properties. You know, they'll have to be careful about how things are graded to make sure there aren't pockets of water that's caught on this, that's causing a runoff problem to adjacent properties. But filling in a tidal floodplain basin has an infinitesimal impact on adjacent properties when it comes to causing sea level or flooding on adjacent properties.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I know traffic is something that comes up, and I wanted to touch base on that with Ms. Klein. If I could ask her to please come up and do that. We did have a meeting with the police chief, who did share with us a video showing traffic backed up on Route 9 in this area, but in both directions. And it was very enlightening, and what he explained to us, and we do have a proposed, I'd like to participate in the solution. There's already a solution that's been discussed between him and Delgado. We would like to become part of that solution and certainly, discuss paying some fair share. But what causes that, he shares with us, and the video is worth seeing if you've not seen it. He's got it in his office. Is when there is a flood event, there is a bridge, small bridge on Route 9 that stops folks from transversing without apparently getting stuck or their engines flooding out. And what has been happening is when that becomes impassable, people don't know it until they're upon it.
Right.
Right, so you get this backup of traffic, then you get people turning around who are leaving, who then cause a backup in both directions. What the chief shared with me is he's been in contact with Delgado about installing a system at that particular site, that bridge location, that would give an advance warning of that flooding situation, because it even apparently can happen in a really high tide. It happened about 4 or 5 times. He says it happens about 4 or 5 times a year. Is the number he shared with me. Because I asked him, like, what's the frequency? And so the system, and I'm going to have Nicole talk about it because she's familiar with how these work in other jurisdictions, would be tied to signage far enough away to say road flooded, do not enter. And so the idea is you steer people away from it before they end up locked into that route. And that is one of the things that we're going to be working with the city and DelDOT in terms of addressing that issue, the flooding issue that's causing transportation issues today. And Ms. Klein certainly is required, you saw this in the plus comment as well, no doubt, to perform the traffic impact study. So she would be involved in that, and I thought I would let her give a few comments about that and also how this system would work. Once blessed. Also, there are a couple signals that are going to be installed one on Route 9 and one on 13 to help.
Traffic signal?
Yes, to help relieve some of the traffic that runs between 9 and 13. So at Hamburg Road and Route 9, for example, there is a traffic signal that has been approved by DelDOT. It was part of the redevelopment of the borough pit. DelDOT has issued a letter of no objection as part of that project. And one of the conditions I can put on the record is that there's a signal built at 9 and Hamburg. In addition, another condition for that project it can proceed forward, and it is a redevelopment project that is very active. It's where the Amazon is today. There's a 13.
Which Amazon?
This is the one along 13 heading south or north. It's in the old borough pit.
Okay.
Right where Route 1 comes in,
Mhm.
just to give you a sort of context placeholder. There's also going to be a signal required where Federal School Lane punches out on 13. And apparently that's been a spot where there's been backing up because there's not a signal for people who decide to cut.
Oh,
through.
yeah, that's,
Yeah,
So if you go GPS, they take you on Federal School Road, and I bypass that.
yeah, okay.
It's a GPS, that's.
The GPS drives you there, interesting. But the signal certainly will provide a more orderly valve for people to get out safely into traffic instead of the suicide rate out that I think some people are making today. So there's other improvements going on in the area. But Nicole, I'm stealing your thunder here. I'll let you talk about the traffic study and also I think this flooding issue, which is I think very important that everybody work through fixing, whether we come or not. It's an existing problem that needs to be addressed clearly.
Yeah, so Nicole Klein Elsier. I am a transportation engineer licensed in the state of Delaware, with McMahon and Bowman Company. Sean did a great job of kind of giving an overview. Maybe I can give a little bit more detail, and happy to answer questions. So with respect to the traffic impact study, that's captured in the plus comments. Essentially, that's a process that will be collaborative between our team, DelDOT, and the city. We'll go through a scoping process and discuss what needs to be studied. DelDOT has a pretty prescriptive model for that, but requires that the city be a part of that discussion. So ultimately, we will leave the scoping process with a memo that tells us everything that we have to look at. We'll do that. We'll submit that study. DelDOT will handle a technical review, but we will submit it to the city as well. DelDOT will issue a draft letter with a number of comments and feedback and information, and that collaborative process will continue between DelDOT, the applicant, and the city. With respect to some of the items that Sean brought up, it was great to have some of that initial feedback from the chief of police on what's happening in the area. That's exactly one of the reasons why we're here, to collect that type of information about existing conditions and what is occurring in the area. So I'm very familiar with and have designed and implemented these what we call flood warning systems. There can be a variety of types, but what from our understanding, the chief has been discussing with DelDOT is a system where detectors would be placed in the area that floods, so that when water reaches a certain level, it would trigger signage that is placed and connected to those detectors to warn drivers at an appropriate location where they could change their route and avoid that area, rather than getting to it, having to turn around, take multiple trips down that road and cause confusion. And certainly we don't want drivers trying to drive through that area. And unfortunately, that is what sometimes occurs. People drive through it not realizing how deep it is and how quickly water can move your vehicle at a relatively low depth. So we'll participate. We would expect this, if this project moves forward, we would participate in those conversations, and as Sean mentioned, be part of the solution. Obviously that's traffic coming to and from the north of the bridge. I believe it's across Army Creek, just south of Deemers Beach. Obviously traffic flowing to and from the south. of that particular location would also be impacted by flooding. And you can imagine that residents of this development could be coming up Route 9 and come across that flooding area. And that's when, what Sean talked about, which is, part of the commitments of the development of the Blue Diamond Park area, that those additional measures with signals and improvements connecting Route 9 and Route 13 on the south side of where that area floods, that's the alternate route. If someone's on Route 9 traveling north and that area floods, they need to cut across a roadway like Hamburg or Federal School to get to Route 13 to circumvent that flooding and get into this development from the north side. So those improvements that are already committed to by other developments would benefit, the residents of this site, particularly, in that condition if flooding were to occur. Now, as part of the traffic impact study process, a big part of that is understanding other committed developments, any improvements that are tied with them. So that will also come into focus as part of the traffic impact study process and be more formally documented within that. So, hopefully that gives a little bit more context and detail into the process and what we will need to do and what we understand from some of the conversations with the chief at this point. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I know there's only one entrance and exit, and there's a pretty fair amount of units that you plan on putting there. Do you think that that's actually sufficient? If there's an emergency and everybody needs to evacuate?
So it is designed as a boulevard, so it's a little wider. We'll have to analyze that access point as part of our traffic study from an operational standpoint. And so that will tell us, whether, from a delay and, motor vehicle operational standpoint, if that can service the development. Based on my experience, the amount of traffic on 7th Street today and the amount of traffic that this development will generate, which will be across a significant period of time. Everybody doesn't enter and exit at the same time. I do believe that it will show that it functions acceptably, but we'll have to prove that and we'll have to work through that.
And if I may, one related issue is there are some competing policies. And good planning is certainly where we all want to get. In the downtown Gateway district, as you probably know, we're encouraged to close curb cuts. So the side access road, which I would point with this, but I can't.
Do you mean it? Were you gonna come up? Yeah.
Like ran away, but certainly not the right hair color. But this side street here that exists today, there is access to that today. However, part of our plan proposes to close that to minimize curb cuts, which is one of the goals in the DG district. However,
Wait a minute, where is that street?
that's Market Street.
It's behind the corner.
Punches out onto 9, right here. So that's the primary access today. We're proposing this alternative access conceptually, because we're trying to balance these things. If the traffic study shows that this single access with the boulevard approach here is better and works, then we could meet one of the standards in the VG district by minimizing curb cuts. However, if the traffic study shows, no, we really should have that second one, then we would come back to you all at site plan and go, traffic study says we need the second one, we're gonna have to propose to open that up. Right now, Nicole is fairly confident that this will pass muster based on her experience, but the traffic study will prove that or not prove that. Another thing that we're doing that's encouraged by the DG is right now, if you remember, there are 2 parcels. So combining parcels is also one of the goals in the DG that we're trying to accomplish. And while I'm here, just to save some time, we also are exploring, and we'll so with DelDOT, a crosswalk in this area with some further traffic calming devices so that folks can walk across to get to the river. And that would be something else in terms of the pedestrian connectivity that's encouraged in the DG district. Well, I showed you those sidewalks. I did not get to the slide where we show you a potential crosswalk at a safe location that would also add to that. So I just thought I'd add that up here looking at this slide.
Is there not a concern getting onto Route 9 north? crossing over, I mean, that's.
That would be one of the things that Nicole would study, whether or not we have to put an island out to only allow rights in and rights out, or whether a crossover would be safe to do.
Yep, all of those details, will have to look at every individual movement. We'll have to look at the warrants for, special auxiliary turn lanes to separate the movements. The DelDOT process will identify pedestrian, bike, and transit related improvements. So we submit a set of data and analysis, and our recommendations, DelDOT reviews them and pushes out their own recommendations. So.
And just to verify, you did say it also encompasses existing approved plans like the 152 units at the Battery.
Correct. Through that, we'll have a scoping meeting and we'll have a whole discussion with DelDOT and the city about what committed developments will be required to be part of our traffic volume projections. And once something is at a certain point in the process, we have to include it. So that, we're sure that we're being holistic and not just looking at existing conditions when there are multiple approved or nearly approved developments that are going to add traffic to the network as well.
Here's a quick, I found a picture of Larkin. So here's what it looks like today. It punches out.
It's one way.
So that would be closed off ideally to comply with one of the concepts in the DG district, unless the traffic analysis says we need to, in which case we come back with our site plan and say, we need to open that up because of the traffic analysis.
One thing I would like to add is, we would, and it was in our letter that, I'm sure, Nicole's study will adequately address the entrance and the capacity ability of the boulevard entrance, but I would also suggest that the applicant meet with the emergency service providers to see if there may be, a hidden secondary entrance to the site for emergency vehicles in case there's a blockage at the main boulevard. So
Yeah,
there's a daily traffic capacity issue that they're going to address, but we would also want to make sure that the emergency providers are satisfied that there's adequate access to the entirety of the site as well.
My understanding is you've already
we did meet
addressed with Chief Mayeski.
We did meet with the chief, and he wants us to stay in the loop with him as the plan progresses, consistent with what Chris is suggesting. Is we want to make sure that we have emergency access as this evolves and where it makes sense. So if we have to move a building because of this access issue, that might change some other things. But we had, I think, a very positive meeting with him. His one concern that he expressed at the concept level was that for the other apartment sites in the area, the placement of fire hydrants in his mind were not ideal. So he asked if we would please work with him in particular on the placement of fire hydrants, which we would have to do in concert with MSC, certainly, to do that better, because apparently that's been an issue. Who would have known? We plan to continue to work with him. But that was really the only material comment he had at the concept level. He may very well have emergency access alternative concerns as well as we hopefully progress. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say it's 8:37. Can we wrap this up in 10 minutes or less?
No,
No.
sorry.
Okay.
So all of this is great for that spot. You're adjacent to one of the most important historic districts in the United States, where people drive through at 35 miles an hour, little roads this wide, and knock people's wing mirrors off and create mayhem. And they're doing that to get to this road to drive down to the beach, just like you and your wife used to do.
But we live in Old Newcastle. We're
So-
allowed to do that.
Precisely. There's starting to be some feeling, and various people have been talking about it for several years now. The street that we live on, 3rd Street, has people coming off of Newcastle Avenue, screaming down our street, turning around and then using the back road to get up to this access to this place. The other big problem with the street is 6th Street. 6th Street is a state road. These other roads belong to the city. But I think you're going to see, and this is a project that we'll talk about in this group, but I've also been talking about it to some people on city council, some effort to either take over Sixth Street in that area and make it a city street so we can stop the GPSs from directing people there. And we've now learned that the chief of police actually has the ability to tell GPSs where they may not send people. And so we're gonna see what we can do to try to calm traffic in the historic area. That old city is not able to accommodate a lot of traffic, and everybody who lives here knows that. And it's been a menace, not only to safety, to people walking their dogs, to the damage to their cars. So as you do the traffic study, you need to take that into account, that one way or another, something's gonna close off in that place because we can't take it anymore. And it, especially in the historic district, which extends all the way up to Sixth Street, but the people on Seventh Street are tearing their hair out too. And you heard some of that. It was a bit exaggerated, in my opinion, in George Velitzakis's proposal.
Yes,
I thought they were a little bit overreacting.
I agree.
But, yeah, well, so we're like-minded in that regard. However, now you're adding another, 500 cars to it. So
We are, and this came up with the chief as well, and he and I had a thoughtful discussion about that. And as we know, it's mostly folks that are cutting through on the way to the beach from out of town.
we need
Right,
to get them
and-
to stop
and-
doing that.
And he and I had a discussion about state roads versus city roads. And I know he is engaging in discussions with DelDOT on how those might, access to those may be better controlled, particularly on the Friday afternoons during the summer when
It's
people are doing.
crazy and it's dangerous. Yeah, and it's affecting our quality of life
No,
too.
and I did make that, and we want to meet with DelDOT, quite frankly, as part of our scoping meeting. To discuss what they're willing to do for the city, because as I understand it, they're not city roads. So it does take a DelDOT blessing to affect that flow, if you will. So it's a complicated issue. It's a complicated site. It's probably one of the reasons why we've only seen 2 interested parties in 20 years. But my client's here ready to roll up the sleeves and work hard on it. The city's willing to do that with us. We appreciate that conceptually, we're not going to solve these problems, and we appreciate we have to come back for a site plan. And we're gonna have to do some more problem solving, but we're trying to put our best foot forward at this point.
To your point, I don't know what we're here to decide. This is all fascinating. So maybe we could do that.
And if I could just suggest something, I'll do whatever you all direct us to do. We do have our architect here who did do the design, and there are the gateway standards. If we tried to read through those quickly just to create a good record for all of you, because I want to check all the boxes. And that was one of Mr. Rogers' points in his review letter. If I could do that, I think that would be helpful for everybody. And then we have some more, but I'll pause and see where everybody is at that point and how much further you want to go tonight. So with that, if I could invite our architect, Thomas McKinnon, up to walk through these factors out of the code. And again, they are a bit nebulous, but I wanted to share them and have him explain his vision. And I'll hold up the exhibit.
No,
These are in the presentation, which is 11 by 17. So we also have the larger boards as well. We have enough for everyone.
oh, nice.
Well, there's enough for all of us, so yeah.
You seem like I know what I'm doing. Where they are and everything. I get my own box.
Oh, thank
I
you.
should have had you do this during that. Well,
Oh, yes, I said the way.
oh,
Savannah White.
Vanna White just took over that whole program. She's gonna be the announcer.
no,
My husband.
she just agreed to come back.
Oh,
Ryan Seacrest is the,
That's
he's gonna be the
Ryan
host.
Seacrest, yeah.
he's gonna stay on.
I'm waiting for Chris to come back. Let's move. I suspect he.
So I know you probably need your reading glasses, but let's do our best.
I'm good. I think Sean had mentioned prior about the neighboring apartment complexes. We did take a look at those with the Garrison apartments being 4 buildings, all 4 stories. The DeMar landings, there are 4 buildings, 3 being 3 stories, one being 6. And we did use similar materials with the masonry brick at lower levels and siding on the second, third floors. We have a pitched roof with roof shingles as well. We have sure. Yeah, we have some horizontal detailing and vertical detailing, which is required from the standards to try to break up the massing. There's an 18-inch water table that would be consistent on all elevations.
What does that mean?
There's a masonry base that just comes up to a certain level.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is
That's a
8
foot and a half that they were talking about, like.
Oh, above the flood.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, the long base here. But we would continue some of the brick on other levels for accent as well. The balcony, there's balconies or patios for each unit, and they're covered as well in these vertical elements with gable roofs above. The 7 of the buildings are 3 stories, which are walk-up units, which would have covered stairs between each of the massings of the buildings. They're covered. The other 3 buildings that are 4 stories would end up having an elevator in a corridor in the center.
And when you say those stairs are open, are you gonna be able to see the stairs from the road or?
Well, they could be seen unless we have landscaping. We didn't show landscaping on.
Okay,
the
but
one
there's not a
rendering.
wall that's,
No.
Okay.
They'd be open up through. Yeah, the similar, like to Mara Landings has that as well with being open with their stairs.
Is that beneficial in the case of a fire, or what's the benefit of having it open other than less material?
You actually get more material with it being open because you have to then have more exterior finishes on the sides as well.
So what would be the benefit of having?
I think it's more outdoor space for the residents where they can come out their covered space as well, and they're separated from each other and noise as well.
But again, we're here to listen to your
I'm
input. If there's a
Curious
preference.
as to why.
It's less monolithic looking. I mean,
it does, it breaks the building up.
they're not beautiful federal buildings, but they're not bad.
They're very generic.
Elevators.
Fourth floor, third.
The 3-story buildings would not have elevators. There's 3 that are 4 stories, would each get one.
So ADA considerations and all of that.
Not, the elevators aren't required for the 3-story building, so they could have accessibility on the lower levels, so.
Okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
And in the 4-story presumably.
4-story, yeah, with elevator.
Windows built to form, just want to check those boxes in the box as well.
Yeah, windows, it's required that they're all kind of vertically aligned, which we have done. But for the most part, they'll be double hung, windows are operable. We talked about roof, we do have the shingle roof. The only 1-story building on the site is the clubhouse, which would also have a pitched roof with a similar style as the buildings.
Which would be one of the amenities for gathering under the DG.
Apartment buildings itself, their majority are expected to be one bedrooms, so. If there was 396 units, there are probably 264 singles and 132 being doubles. Although we did mention that we'd be potentially losing some with the possibility of some commercial space.
And if I may just interject, because I know this is probably on your minds, where did the density come from, right? What we did was we just went by most recent. There's different ways of looking at this because the code does not prescribe a specific density. What we did is we just used the last application, which was Scottus's. And that is a smaller site, but in that case, ultimately the Board of Adjustment came out at about 23 to 24 dwellings per acre. This project is 23.8 So we used the Velkakis approval for the Board of Adjustment, which again, not driven by code. But where they ended up, from a density standpoint, as sort of the benchmark for how we did the density on this site. And that's why you're not seeing all 4-story buildings, for example. The Board of Adjustment, just as a footnote, originally the Planning Commission was at about 31 units per acre on the Velkakis project. So, and they in their process voted to throttle that back to 23. I think it was a close vote. So we used the 23 because we expected if we progressed the Board of Adjustment, that was the standard that they had at least set on the prior application. So that's what drove this density and how we got
I thought it was at 24.
there.
That's what I
we
was,
have,
Maybe they rounded it
we
up.
have,
I was given
31.
by a report I asked for that was. included.
yeah, it was, 32
Oh, was that
units on
before-
1.07 acres.
Maybe that was before they took out the
No,
4
this
units.
was, I asked Chris to send that to everybody.
Oh, right, but I meant before they took out the 4 units for the commercial property.
No, I'm talking about,
Okay, number of units versus
Oh,
density. Okay, I think Chris can
okay,
clarify that.
so 24 units is approved for this
Yes.
property.
And that comes out
To about 31 units per acre.
Just in-
because it's less than an acre.
Oh, okay.
But in any case, the Board of Adjustment brought it back to about 23.3 and we're at 23.8. Give or take, on this
So you
project.
might need to come back a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. I just thought that was a good spot to talk about density. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Is that middle picture, that they cut, that's just an entry, what is that big?
This one?
Yeah.
The
what's
side,
that?
that's the side entrance,
But
or the
what's
side.
that? Yeah, what's that he's,
On the first floor, it's just mechanical space for the buildings.
okay,
And we do want to add some detailing and just not to make it
Is,
seem like.
are all the units gonna have their own individual HVAC system and everything?
You would expect that.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to touch
I
on?
think one other question was about our, on the standards, was about the front entrances, they are on the front, elevations or rear, nothing on the side elevations.
So
As far as entry to the units.
yeah, and I think that's the one on the screen is, yes, no, that's the larger one, but on the screen, we do have a nice, I think, front elevation perspective that puts the units side by side with the different materials that are used. And I did mention for the record that vinyl was anticipated, the heavy duty vinyl, not unlike Deemer's Landing.
Correct.
Um,
And, yeah, Garrison as well.
and Garrison as well, but with the
Oh,
brick
for the
mix.
siding, yeah.
And just, it'll be a silly question. Will these be real doors, access ways to the units on the?
Yeah, they have a patio there. On the first floor, we have patios, upper floors are bathrooms.
Okay,
Brownfield, redevelopment, infill, trying to check all the boxes that I know you all typically weigh and consider as part of this application.
One last thing I want to say with our, the aerial rendering we had, we did not include all the trees along the street level, just so you could see the building.
Yeah.
So that
That's
is
fine.
One here.
just so that it was not coming out as a conflict with the landscape. It was more just visually see. So that would be expected, that there would be trees along the, main street there.
And Mr. Jaffe has a project, Freedom Development, just across the way. He is the one, his company, who stepped in to help reignite the completion of River Bend. So he has already been working with Mr. Bergstrom and trying to complete that sort of project that stopped and was stalled, and came in, addressed the wetland concerns, the filling that had happened there, and worked closely with MSC, with Mr. Bergstrom and others to reignite that and get that completed. And if you're down that way and you drive through, which I did recently, it's well underway. So
That's encouraging.
he's vested, you know, this company's already vested in the city, and this is right across the street, almost.
One of the questions I have, has to do with who is the target market of the renters you're going after?
Jonathan, would you like to-
So like,
No,
yeah, I mean, and you can kind of include that with how much rent you're looking at charging.
we haven't gotten that far yet. By the time we actually get there, it'll be 2 years down the road. We've had some fluctuations. Everybody knows in the rental market, but I mean, we'd be on par with what the garrison is doing. I don't know if you have, what's a breakdown of 1 and 2 bedrooms in there? They're all 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom
It
apartment.
is, 264, give or take, 1 bedroom with 1 bath, and 132, 2 bedroom with 2 bath.
Yeah, and they're usually built, since they're newer apartments, will be more on the luxury side.
Okay,
There's nicer
so you're-
finishes. We have other apartments that are going up all over the place now, but.
Okay, so you're going after the high-end market or
Yeah.
higher income?
The high income, yeah. When you're doing something like this, which is nice in this location, which I think is pretty desirable, that's why we're here, that's why we're building already at Riverbend. I think the project will do well. We like the location. You guys always like the location.
So one of the things that's really, really needed in Newcastle County is housing for like folks that have just graduated from college and have their first job. You know, they can't afford $2,000, $2,500 for an apartment. That kind of moderate income starter apartment, for lack of a better term.
Or even the elderly who want to stay within Newcastle, who need to move to one floor living.
This is
Um,
probably.
Can I have some stuff here. I just grabbed this off the internet today, just went on to the site, so I didn't call anybody. 1 bedroom, 1.5 bath at the Helm runs, 1670 to 1850. And as you go up in floors, it goes up in price. 2 bedrooms start at 1790, go to 2045, obviously higher floor, higher square footage. Beamer's Landing, you're looking at a 1 bedroom, 1.5 bath, 1640 to 1690. Their income qualifications are between 59,000 and for their 3 bedroom at $75,000 minimum income qualification, just to qualify for these. So just to give you an idea of what they're doing, they offer 2 bedrooms starting at 1715 up to 1880. 3 bedrooms at 2030. The Garrison is running 1 bedrooms anywhere from 1450 to 1750, and their 2 bedrooms are 1700 to 2200. All this information I found just going on to their websites. To be considered, just so you know, middle class in Delaware, according to Newsweek, this is in 2023. In Delaware, a family of 4, middle income is 67,000. So this is definitely over a middle income. You know, that's the minimum to be considered middle class. So this is definitely targeting people who are over middle class. My big concern, and I'm gonna say this right now because I don't know if we get to address it, is in the plan, we're looking for affordable home ownership. And with all the projects that we currently have going, you're looking at possibly 49% homeownership at the best by adding all these apartments. Including all the projects, not just this one, River's Edge, the Battery, Delaware Street, and this project.
And this, more, if I pronounce it last name correctly.
Yes.
Thanks. That, price points, certainly something we can talk about at site plan.
I mean, we understand the city doesn't have control over this.
Yeah. But
Unless
it's-
we put in, we talked about this with Chris, unless there's a committee and a group that handles like the housing within the city, which I don't think we have the wherewithal to do.
But we could certainly, and again, I'd have to discuss with my client, and it could give us something to think about, but we could certainly talk about a certain number of units at a certain price range. What we're of course trying to do is balance the cost of doing the desirable design with affordability, because the more affordable we are, the more we're gonna rent, right, more quickly. So there's this balance that always has to be struck. The inflation factor we're all dealing with, all of us, is the unknown variable too. So when Jonathan says 2 years, like it is a little hard to predict where we're gonna be in 2 years. But what I've seen in other jurisdictions is sometimes
there could be a private agreement voluntarily issued. And again, I'm not talking to my clients, look at Metro. But I would certainly be willing to talk to them about something at the site plan level, where we volunteer some number of units at a certain range based on median income and things like that. That's something we'd be open to discussing, but the numbers would only have to work for those units.
Well, I get it. I mean, you're gonna have to have a loan and the bank's gonna have minimum debt
Yeah.
service coverages, so
Yeah.
I get that.
But that's interesting, and I think, I mean, I hope I'm speaking for everybody, I think we're interested in that. Because also, we want an integrated community, you know, and that's letting people have steps up, so. And Newcastle is not particularly integrated. And I think that's one of its structural faults. So anything we could do to make it possible to be the city of the future, that would be good.
I would agree, and getting young professionals here in apartments, those people are gonna fall in love with the city and then buy the homes that the older folks wanna probably switch places.
We all buy.
Or buy, one of the two. Definitely are gonna be doing.
Chairperson, this is exactly what my wife went through when we left. Because we could not afford, we had a school house in Old Newcastle. We lived in Joe Troner's house, 144 East Third Street on the third floor. And we rented $100 a month, utilities included.
Obviously a while ago.
This was a while ago. But we would love to live in the city, we just couldn't afford to. And, you know, once you end up outside the city and you start that life someplace else, it's hard to
hard to
find your
come
way
back.
back. We do find our way back for certain events in Battery Park and Halloween and whatnot, or New York Orchestra, although it's been a while. But that is I get it. I get what you're saying, and it's something I think we can work on with you a little bit here.
The biggest challenge just from a developer standpoint of that is just the cost, because I've had these conversations with both municipalities, and obviously we're sensitive to that. And the biggest issue is by the time you build the buildings, you get everything done, like you said very eloquently, you're looking at bank financing and everything else to get these things going, and at the end of the day, it doesn't pencil out unless you're taking outside money, and that's something that our company doesn't do. There's all sorts of programs out there that help do that, but it's not something we specialize in. It is actually a specialty in actually how to develop that. So when you're looking at new housing stock coming along, you do have more supply, which naturally, like Sean's saying, it'll naturally help some of the rent. So if there's more apartments in Newcastle, there's more competition, so you'll have
Actually,
some price alleviation there, but.
something to look into, because, and I can't remember all the details. And I can probably track them down easily enough, but Delaware State Housing Delaware State Housing Authority has a program to offset the cost of some multifamily housing projects. It might be worth looking into, that might allow you to kind of lower the rent, and I'll have to.
It's Delaware State Housing Authority, I know exactly what you're talking about. We can look into that.
They got a big pot of money from the federal government.
Yes,
They're
and
trying to
actually,
utilize.
probably, maybe before we leave, I can remember the name of my friend who kind of runs that program, or runs interference for that program. And can get that to you.
We're happy to entertain any dialogue with anybody about anything. It's in my personal experience, we've tried several times to do that, and usually what happens whenever you involve those sorts of programs, they end up putting different qualifications on to say, oh, here's your money to help, and by the way, now you have to build a prevailing wage. You go back and you do all your math, all of a sudden you're upside down, you can't accept the money. That's why I said it's like a different business model. There's different people that specialize in that. We don't do it. The one thing we do, and we are cognizant of, where you're saying, hey, you have different price points. If you notice our 1-bedroom versus 2-bedroom mix, that's 100% deliberate, and it's 100% to keep some of those units on the lower side of where we need to be. So Sean said, the more we rent, the more people that we can have as our customer base, the better off we are. So we are cognizant of that. We do try and do that.
Okay.
And the Delaware State Housing Authority did offer some comments on page 17. of the-
I saw where they were super supportive of the program.
Yes, and the state agencies, they did, they had no objection, subject of course to your codes and regs. And it is a level 1 investment area where redevelopment is strongly encouraged, as is infill.
So I really appreciate your patience tonight. I know we had a lot of things to go through. And I'll end now. I think there's a couple of other things we would have liked to talk about, but I know time's limited for
I
everybody.
still don't know what we're supposed to be deciding.
I'll give you my perspective on that. We're seeking a recommendation in favor of the concept so that we can advance with a favorable recommendation to the Board of Adjustment.
But I don't know what the criteria is. That's my.
Well, we were actually clicking them off.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead. Chris,
I'm pretty dumb, so I really need it spelled out. So thank you for helping me.
And I would just ask, because I'm cutting it a little bit short, even though it's been very long, that we'd be able to backfill anything that they come up, you have questions about with our experts here, because we were prepared to hit all the boxes. But I think we're a little bit short of that just because of time.
Yeah, we're gonna have to bring our pajamas next time. Okay. Any final questions for Mr. Tucker?
And I just asked if there's something that you feel that in standards that you'd like some more information on, you just give us that opportunity because we can be prepared to talk about it. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chris.
Yeah, and I guess, I wanted to add to the affordable housing, discussion. And just be a good time to talk about what your role is here tonight. So your role, multifamily unit developments are allowed as special exceptions in the DG zone.
Okay.
So your role here tonight is to review the concept plan and make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment on the special exception. The Board of Adjustment has, we amended the code a year or two ago to provide more guidance to the Board of Adjustment on the criteria that they use, that they should use to judge special exception. I would, as a planning commission, I would recommend to you, feel freer to make a recommendation as you see fit, and don't bind yourself to, is it in the best interest of the city and the convenience of the community and the benefit of public welfare? Your role is the planning commission. You are the keepers of the comprehensive plan. It's your document. So I would feel, give you a little bit more latitude in what your recommendation is, in the criteria that you use in making your recommendation. And to the affordable housing is a great conversation. I appreciate the owner or the developer, and Mr. Tucker speaking to that point. I always feel like a rain cloud on these kind of conversations, but to the extent that type of that's rolled into your recommendation, that we look into some affordable housing component, just keep in mind that it has to be reasonably enforceable by the city. We can't just say it and expect the city staff to have a program to keep track of the rent, in 610 West 7th Street for 10, 20 years from now. So the programs that they were talking about, that's baked in to the development plan. That's baked. There's a whole universe of programs and policies and regulations that oversee those types of programs and those types of developments. And the city, doesn't have that capability, and it's usually implemented by, a state housing authority, because they have, reporting requirements on income and reporting requirements on rents and those type of things. And to the extent that we want to see that happen here, we have to make sure that it's a practical recommendation and a practical, if it gets to the Board of Adjustment, a practical condition. So with that, I wanted to add, by code, I have to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. So at this level, I'd rather help you articulate your thoughts in a recommendation, as opposed to just coming out and making my recommendation, because I have to, by code, make a formal recommendation to the board. So I'm kind of want to hear what you say, and to the extent that you need it, formulated into, you need some articulation to your recommendation, I'm here to assist.
I mean, I think the proposed plan looks good. Barring obviously any traffic concerns, making sure that the remediation is done correctly. And making sure that, it doesn't interfere with the existing properties that are adjacent to it. I think that it will, fix what is currently an eyesore and an environmental issue for that current property. So I would be in favor, I think, of it, as long as, again, some of the criteria are met to make sure that the remediation is done properly, the traffic study is done, and it doesn't interfere with the current traffic issues, I think are probably my two main concerns.
To that, I would add traffic taking into account the historic area, which is a feeder to that area, and it really has to be taken into account, a real solution. Sounds like there's a lot of interesting little pieces happening around the place, but this could upend all of that, and still see thousands more people coming through the old city all the time, so.
I am very concerned about the number of current projects already approved that have not even been started. Based on the Battery, River Edge, the 7, the Delaware Street, we have anywhere from 450 to 627 rental only units, depending on River Edge, how they determine their single family, twins, and townhouses, if they're going to rent or sell them out. We're changing the overall demographic of the city from, if this should be approved, it's less homeownership at the very minimum within the city. So you're going based on the 2020 census, and I understand that there's been housing, I think houses built since then, so slightly off, but you're at 62.5% homeownership versus 37.5% homeownership. With the projects already approved, we would be about, if they sold the single families and the twins and the townhouses as owner occupied and rented only at River Edge, you're about 55.6% homeownership and 44.4%. So that would be the best case scenario. If we add this project to that at rental only, you're now at 49.4% of homeownership versus 50.6%. So now you're at an even split. I don't know how that change in demographic is going to affect the city. And I think moving too fast to approve something like this with those 3 items already out there and approved would be a detriment and just not looking out for the city's future.
Well, that leads to a question that I'm not sure we asked enough of for the, I guess it's River Edge, the Lukens Drive project, which is how much money does the city make on?
Oh, we
those?
did get that.
We did.
I don't think it's about the city. I think it's the climate of the city. And part of the comprehensive plan in the city is to increase affordable opportunities for home ownership, not just to live within the city, but to own a home. And you're not adding homes that people can buy. You're only adding rental properties with leases. I just think at this point in time, we have these 3 2 of which are very large properties already approved and in the works. And I don't know how long it'll take before we see the impact of those and to approve something that gonna change the demographic. I mean, you're changing an increase of 1,023 units total if you include this, adding them to the existing 2482 housing units. That's housing units. That's rental properties and homeowner housing. You're increasing by 41% the whole demo within the city. To me, that's an extreme change that without being thoughtful and understanding how these three things are gonna impact the city. To add something like that could be extremely detrimental because you're changing the makeup of the town.
On the other hand, I would say as someone who eats in the restaurant on Delaware Street every day that they're open, you'd be amazed how many people from outside the city are coming in there now to enjoy that beautiful main street. And if more people are in town and spending money in that street, it's the even more rich environment for everybody who lives here. So, I mean, of course, my focus is the old town. I live there, I walk around there. But I would also say that that would bring in people buying things in all the other businesses all the way down Newcastle Avenue, potentially. So, people who live here spend money, and
I'd spend
spending
there
money
too.
floats all the boats, right?
I agree.
So, and also potentially provides work for other people as well. So, and I don't know enough myself, maybe Chris, you have more knowledge, but I've heard it argued, not my belief, just what I've heard argued, that people today coming out of school and in the professional environment don't want to own a house. They only want to rent.
True.
So if that's happening, the way to get wealthy young professionals to come here and spend their money is to provide housing units for them that meet their criteria. It's not my favorite idea, but on the other hand, if that's how it is in the world, and I don't know, but that's what I've heard from people who are knowledgeable about it. So, do you know anything about that, Chris? About 10.
I don't professional statistics. I just know it anecdotally as well.
But those professionals do want to buy houses eventually, and they will not be buying in our city.
Tim, you.
Yeah, I had a question that I'm not sure to whom I wish to address the question, but probably not to be answered now. Had you considered selling these rather than renting them?
Or some
doing
of
a
them,
mix?
or turning it condo later, which is so often happens with these things.
So, not
I'm
to be
sure they don't
answered
want to
now,
say.
But to the question that you're bringing up about changing the mix, if they were sold ultimately rather than rental, does that change how we view this, how you view this?
It could possibly, yes.
We are am I allowed to talk during the discussion part?
You have
We
my
are
permission.
building Riverbend, so I don't know if that's in your calculations there, but that's probably 200 for sale houses that our company is doing here in Newcastle. So as far as us specifically as developers, giving you guys a balance of for sale and for rent, certainly I don't know what other people are doing, but certainly I can testify the fact that we are. So I think that's important. As far as the demographics doing that, you're absolutely right. People out of school, it's the people that rent apartments, you actually get a lot of older folks that want to downsize. And you got a lot of young professionals just married, sometimes roommates in the 2 bedrooms, but that's predominantly what you're gonna get. So that, and those people, you know, you have to save up for down payment or you borrow from mom and dad. So they absolutely come to the apartments. That's just how it evolves.
And I think we've talked in the past, Kristen, about, you know, the city being able to control, you know, home ownership versus rental within this small geography when we're part of obviously we're in the middle of the, you know, eastern seaboard megalopolis. So the city does have, you know, laudable land use goal relative to rentals and home ownership, but there's only so much we can do given the regional market forces that, you know, sweep across this area.
Well, it's unfortunate. I will say this because you can have a $1,600 rent and you can get approved for it, but you can't get approved for a mortgage that'll cost $1,000. And that's one of the big hiccups within the housing market is you have these young professionals paying $1,600-$1,800 a month for rent, but they can't qualify for a mortgage to buy a house at $1,000. So that's you know,
Well,
where we are, and it's an unfortunate product of inflation and of everything else in the time, but inflation's not gonna last forever, and again, I just think that type of change, you know, you're looking at.
well, one thing I would hope is that a project like this would increase the home values of the adjacent Dobbsville properties. And I know that there were, from what I understand, some vacant properties and things over there that if, you know, once, what is it, River's Edge gets completed and this property get completed, those property values would go up and attract new buyers. So potentially those vacant properties could be resold and be rejuvenated. Whereas they're not currently being used and probably not currently being counted properly or, you know, being considered. I don't know if you have any opinion on property values in regards to something like this.
I'm not an expert to be able to say, you know, what a development at this price point would do to adjacent properties like Dobbinville. That's beyond my expertise, and or what Riverbend, the build out of Riverbend would do. I don't have a answer on that one way or another. I'm sorry.
I can just give you my experience, having done it for 20 years, it always helps. You bring in new nice stuff and new nice people. We're owner managers, we'd be building this for ourselves to own it, manage it. When you're entitling it, so we'd be here through the process. When we do projects, since we're owners and managers, I think most people are careful, maybe we're extra careful about how we set these up, because I never want to create management problems for myself down the road. So we try and do a good job, you know, 24-hour maintenance, all that good stuff that just helps add to the neighborhood. And, you know, what I tell a lot of boards as we come in, we try and become part of the community. So this is one of those things that it absolutely lifts the value of the property.
Go ahead.
To that point, I would agree with the recommendation, based upon the presentation that was provided on this evening. I do like the fact that there's a collaboration between the city and Del Dot on the traffic. I love that, what you're trying to do there. I do, also like the fact, that we're addressing the wetlands and the contamination and those things that were brought up earlier. The sea level rise and all of those things that were, pretty much, I feel like there was a lot of homework done on this, obviously, with the slide deck. Slide deck back up here. But, I do appreciate, the, presentation that was given and the experts that were here tonight to share with us.
So I'm wondering, if there's a way we can get some information and maybe from the university to find out what's the impact on a small town if the change of rental versus owner occupied changes. I mean, I know I was certainly brought up with the idea that it's always better to have owner occupied, but I don't have any data to back that up. I don't know.
Well, is that something we really need to consider now for this purpose, or is that something we would consider when we get the final plan and really get to view kind of what
Probably
the
a
final
little,
numbers end up being?
I think we need that information, unless you already know the answer to that.
No, I don't, but I would be hesitant to expect an answer to that to impact a decision on a site plan. I mean, we're making a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment on a concept plan. And if we're then going to do a study on rentals versus home ownership and what's the ideal mix, and that's going to impact our decision on a site plan that's already been approved by the Board of Adjustment and you as a conceptually, I think that's too much of a, that's going to be potentially a dramatic change to what's being presented here tonight. To the extent that we're going to say, well, we want half of them to be condos because of the study that we just did that says, you know, the ideal mix should be X, Y, and Z. They can't just change their model to make these condos. There's a whole other world to condominium associations and financing and, I'm sure building codes and.
That gets to something though that we started looking at before I rolled off of the committee, which is what is our proactive job here? We're not just here to look at these things and say yes or no. We have a role in creating a plan. And to your point, let's see if we can create a plan that makes it attractive for less expensive rental units and affordable housing that people can buy to be brought into this city. I think there's things we can do.
But I mean, you do have an application in front of you here tonight, so.
So we have
Exactly.
to be post this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was my point, is, we can't jump off the horse right now. We have to finish this, but why don't
Or
we make it part of our
retroactive,
mission
Yeah.
to do this going forward? I think we really should.
Well, that is part of comprehensive plan.
When did, remind me when the next revision
Having
of the
been
comprehensive plan is?
doesn't make it happen unless we have a program.
But you
to make
can't
it
go out there and say, hey, we're looking for somebody to build condos or housing.
Why not?
They're looking to build something else.
I mean, I don't want to get us too off the point, but to your point, Commissioner. Something like that would be, you talk about it at a meeting, you put it as an agenda item. You reach some consensus and I'm just throwing words out there. You make a recommendation to the city council to look into an affordable housing task force or something.
Plan or
I'm
something,
not
exactly,
suggesting that,
exactly.
but that's how that proactive planning commission works. And maybe you wait until the 5-year review of your comp plan and get it embedded and seek to get it embedded in the comp plan to give it even more force.
Yeah.
2025,
Okay, so we have a couple years that we can
20,
work towards.
25 years. Yeah, 2025. So that's not too far away where you're gonna be asked to review your comprehensive plan to make sure that its goals, objectives, and strategies are still valid, given what's happened since it was adopted. And I've heard that a lot from here and from this commission. So maybe that's something that's a 5-year thing.
2-year?
Well, 20, yes, a 5-year comp plan review under.
Okay. I have a motion from Cynthia.
Is there?
Oh, did I make a motion? I wasn't. I think Bree made the motion, really.
Oh, did you make a motion? Did
I
somebody?
mean, I said I would be in favor of it. I mean, especially as a resident in Washington Park, I mean, that area is a big eyesore for me. And I think that driving past that on a regular basis and seeing it just sitting there for 20 years like that. I'd rather see something else there. And if nobody else is gonna do anything with it, you know.
Doesn't seem to be popular.
Okay, so just puts, I move in front of that.
Wait, can I interject? If you're inclined to make a favorable recommendation, I would recommend that you add conditions that the applicant submit for review a traffic impact study.
That includes the historic area.
We would include that as appropriate at the scoping meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
And that the traffic impact study be submitted and reviewed by DelDOT and the city engineer prior to the Board of Adjustment consideration of a special exception.
Actually, the other thing, when it comes back, if we could, for when we did, on Lucan's Drive, it gave us an idea of how much revenue the city would get and additional expenses.
Fiscal impact.
But just to kind of know what we're looking at. So I need a motion. Well, actually, are we done? Any more comments? Do I have a motion?
I motion to move it forward on the basis that the traffic study is done. As well as appropriate remediation steps are considered.
The approval
For the
of the John
traffic
Rec
study.
plan, yes.
Yeah.
And that they make some effort on affordable units, at least.
or look into the
Look into it.
possibility, okay. What else?
So you made a motion to make a favorable recommendation to the Board of Adjustment on the special exception.
Yeah.
Based on those conditions on.
Yeah,
Is there any other conditions we missed?
I think those are probably of the greatest concern.
Yeah, but
Um,
we can't go back. If there's any we missed, we want to get them now.
Well, we have more chances
Okay.
to nibble on them.
You mean,
Not really. I mean, we want to give him a pretty clear idea of what he's gonna do, so
I
he
didn't.
can make a decision.
I'm sorry, Mr. Madam Chair.
Good.
I didn't include the remediation because that's gonna be part of the natural process. This isn't going anywhere unless they satisfy Delta.
Yeah.
Or Denrick when it comes to the brownfields issue.
mhm.
So we know that will come as out of the normal process. Getting the traffic impact study in before the Board of Adjustment hears the case wouldn't necessarily happen unless we recommend it here now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I second it.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. It carries with one nay. One no vote. Is there any further business that we need to discuss?
Two things. On the recommendation to city council on ordinance 540. We just said we recommend version 1, but I think we need to say, because give them some reason, which is we think there needs to be some flexibility in dealing with people on zoning that isn't, massive, whatever. So how do we, who's doing that? How do we do that?
Actually, I think people were sitting here, they kind of heard it.
Thank you. I can.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you guys.
The decision's already been made and I can certainly pass that on.
Okay,
I'll be there. if
Okay.
this is Presented to the council.
but it's for practical reasons. It's not for dumb stuff. The other thing that I wanted to do was to say that, I think it's time for this commission to address attendance and to find commissioners who can,
Can we even do that?
I don't
know if we have the ability to do that. I agree with you. I totally
I mean, it's
agree.
very
Well,
frustrating.
I think, my understanding was they may consider, city council, may consider, a motion to possibly, include that language about attendance, in some type of formal way, but I don't know where that stands. That was my.
They're not gonna make any type of firm guideline on it, though, but they do that.
But even informally, can we call people who don't show up here and say, can you
Yes, you
please
can.
show up?
Yes,
Number
you can.
one, and number
Or
two.
resign.
Or resign. I think we need to do that now. Because we need people representing the whole city and we've got a whole tranche of the city not represented here on this board because people don't show up. So,
Actually, we only have one person not showing up.
Two.
Oh, two.
yeah. Kira comes as often as she can. I mean, I respect that. Vera never comes to these meetings. And she's a very nice and respectable person. But if she doesn't come, then let's find somebody else who can and can contribute to these important decisions for the city.
Isn't that something we need, since the mayor has to appoint the people, maybe that's an issue we need to take to the mayor.
I did take it to the mayor.
Oh,
and,
cool.
She recommended that the chairperson
We don't have
contact.
We don't have a chairperson.
Exactly, contact the people who miss the meetings and say if this is not within your ability to attend these meetings, to resign from the post so that additional people can be appointed to these roles. In addition to that, they had decided on not applying the similar attendance rules as they do have for council.
What? Oh,
I'm sorry, just, I may suggest that you address that to the city council I mean, to the city administrator before you contact the members. and-
The mayor
recommendations.
advised me specifically
the-
that we could do that. We
But
could
there's
contact them and
no,
say,
but there's no,
are you planning on?
but we don't have anyone who could do that right now. We don't have.
Don't have a chair.
I would, can we get on the agenda for next month, appointment of the chair?
Yes, please.
And then we will go through.
The chair and
appropriate-
assistant chair or
Yeah.
vice
Yeah,
chair?
appointment of officers.
Yeah, because we're just stymied until we have that.
And then I would recommend that, you know, the whoever is appointed chair, take that concern. And I agree, take it to the city administrator first, just so staff's in the loop. City administrator kind of needs to know what's going on in all aspects, and then that person will take,
That's Bill Bartholomew.
yes,
For now, he's still here.
Yeah, he's, I've taken that to him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
So slightly related to that is who puts our agenda together?
Typically, the chair speaks
Okay.
to the city office and makes up the agenda. If you would like to set an agenda tonight, I will present it to the city office, or if one of you wants to contact the city office with an agenda after the fact.
Well, since we can't talk amongst ourselves privately, it should be agreed upon tonight.
And if you would like me to present your agenda as you discuss it tonight, I will do that to the city office.
It's a moribund process.
And typically the city clerk runs it by the city solicitor, myself,
Okay.
you know.
So,
More for wording, you know, and
Yeah.
I've been meaning to get the chairperson item on the agenda and
so for the next meeting, can we go with the roll call, the approval of minutes? Any other actual business, and then an election or whatever it is, appointment of officers
Yes,
for the
please.
committee?
Do you think there's anything we need to address at the next meeting we should include? I don't see anything coming up. This was like
Well, I don't.
that
know.
you're aware of.
Yeah, right. There is a site plan out there that's coming.
Floating around and.
For the batteries.
For 3,000 apartments.
Yeah. So,
It's,
Get ready.
I can't predict what's gonna be on the agenda relative to.
But do you
applications.
feel there's anything that we should,
Well-
at this point, we're missing?
Why don't
As
we
a-
put on the agenda how we're going to figure out the right mix of affordable housing and make some kind of research recommendation, something like that? Why don't we put that on as an agenda item so we can have a real discussion about it and figure out a plan? Or at least start to figure out something. So can we do that too?
What exactly do you have
Um,
a discussion about?
Rental versus homeownership.
Rental versus homeownership and affordable housing, both,
and the trends that are.
that are driving that.
Because I think one of the challenges with looking at retrospective trends and data is that we've got a big demographic change that's happening with an aging population right now that really causes a lot of things in the past to be not as relevant as they were for decades. We're seeing this tremendously in Sussex County and huge impacts on healthcare. So it stands to reason, I think, that the same is going to be true here. And there's probably some good studies and data out there. Let's take the opportunity to do some digging, find the information. And as you suggest, have a robust conversation about it. I very much think that should be on our radar. Along with an official chairperson. And a co-chair, yes, that's a great idea.
Okay, sorry to be such a driver, guys, but you know, it has to be worthwhile.
That's why we're gonna nominate you as chair.
No, I don't need to be the chair. I'm a dog's body. I'll do all the work you want. I don't need to be the chair.
Dog's body.
Yeah, dog's body. I would do the work.
Okay, so do you have the agenda items we need for the next meeting?
Roll call, approval of the minutes, appointment of officers, and rental versus homeownership and affordable housing, What Drive got, research studies.
Beauty.
And then Chris will add whatever is appropriate in terms of,
Public comments.
Yeah.
no, we're getting rid of them.
Yeah.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I gotta get my kids.
Thanks, Jeff.
By the way.